And we are live. It is about 5 o'clock Eastern time, according to my big clock. And yes, I've got a big clock right over here. You'll have to trust me on that. I'm doing an update to an update. I did the story about a week ago now about the teenage girl who got handcuffed by the judge in 36th District Court because she was falling asleep. And he chastised her. He had her handcuffed at one point. Apparently, he made her put on some jail clothing and did embarrass her. And in the story, it was a little shy on details. The story that I saw did not include as many details as I'd like to know. And I heard people speculating about a lot of it. In fact, I had a lot of people telling me that, Steve, you got it all wrong. It was during a trial. She was in there watching a trial. No. Turns out she wasn't. It was a field trip, like I thought. So here is the update. A lawsuit has been filed. The family, the mother of the girl, has filed a lawsuit on her behalf. And the law firm representing her is Jeffrey Feiger's law firm, Feiger Law. And this is important. You might say, Steve, how important could that be? It's important because if I had a big case, that's who I'd want to handle my case. And number two, the attorney who's quoted in the case is actually someone I know because he was in a class I taught a long time ago. So we're going to talk about this. But by the way, I did have some people tell me that I should never laugh in any story that contains any serious elements. So I'm going to try really hard not to laugh, at least not during the telling of this story, but we'll see how long that lasts. It might not last that long, but thank you to everybody who's joining. I did put this up literally in the last minute because I looked over and I realized, oh, hey, it's 2 minutes to 5. How fast can we do this? So we'll do it live. Mom of teen handcuffed for sleeping in Detroit courtroom sues judge. And also, some of the people in the courtroom got sued also, court officers and so on. Kara Berg of the Detroit News wrote this version of it. The mother of the 15-year-old girl who fell asleep in a Detroit courtroom and ended up in a jail uniform and handcuffs has sued the judge who took her into custody. And her attorneys said Wednesday the judge's actions were inappropriate. Now, that's an understatement of understatements. And you understand that we all knew that it was inappropriate. The interesting thing here is that what I found amazing was that when it was pointed out to the judge that perhaps what you did there was wrong, he doubled down on it and said, oh, I was trying to teach her a lesson. I was trying to scare her straight, except that she wasn't in court as a participant. She was simply there on a field trip. You don't need to scare field trip participants straight of anything. So she fell asleep while on a field trip August 13th in Judge Kenneth King's 36th District Courtroom in Detroit, and he yelled at her. That's according to Feiger Law Firm attorney James Harrington. I know James. When she fell asleep for a second time, King humiliated her in front of her peers and on YouTube, where the court proceedings were live streamed for anyone to see. And by the way, I did not realize it was being live streamed on YouTube, and this judge has been criticized for apparently hamming it up to the cameras. And the fact that the courtrooms are live streamed is a good thing. I think it's important that people can see what happens in courtrooms. But the judges should pretend that the cameras aren't there. The cameras should not affect what's happening in the courtroom. Collegia Anderson says, thank you for covering these stories. Very educational. Thank you for thanking me and paying attention. I like that. So Harrington said, this is a very troubling case. We had a member of our bench berate, humiliate, and essentially incarcerate a 15-year-old kid. This was very, very real to her, very, very scary to her, and somebody in a position of trust that was in a position of authority and power is threatening her about jail time, threatening her by literally placing her in handcuffs. The lawsuit was filed Wednesday in federal court in Detroit. It names the judge, the security guards, and 2 court officers as defendants. I don't think they've got their names yet because I saw some does and rows in the case caption, which, by the way, I did read the lawsuit. It accuses King of malicious prosecution, unlawful arrest and prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress, false arrest, and invasion of privacy. And in my previous videos, when I talked about this, I had several people say, Steve, why didn't you go into some more detail about what lawsuit she could file? And the reason I was hesitant to do that was, number one, I thought the story was just how out of line the judge was. Getting into the lawsuit would be secondary to me. But number two, the facts weren't terribly clear from the stories I saw. The stories I saw didn't say like how long she was incarcerated for, how long the handcuffs were on her, or any of that kind of stuff. And so I really wanted to get a feel for that before I started opining. But you'll notice that malicious prosecution is something that they've listed as a cause of action. And now this is why good attorneys are out there and why they make the big bucks, because malicious prosecution is one that I hadn't thought of. I mean, I thought of the emotional distress, false arrest, false imprisonment, kidnapping, all those things. But malicious prosecution, and yeah, because in essence he was having her prosecuted. So Harrington said they were not asking for a specific amount of damages when asked by a reporter, how much are you guys looking for? I'm assuming that was the question. And to get into federal court, you simply must plead to give damages above and beyond a certain amount. So they pled that, and they're going to let a jury sort it out if it gets that far. The girl was visiting the courtroom on a field trip with a nonprofit, the Greening of Detroit. Court was not in session. Now, there's not a period there, but I'm stopping there because I think it's important. I had a lot of people say, well, Steve, if she falls asleep in court, that's going to distract the jury. That'll distract the witnesses. Court was not in session. Now, the judge was a guest lecturer as part of a vocational training that the nonprofit put together according to lawsuits. They basically said, hey, if you're thinking about a legal career, let's all go into a courtroom and see what happens in a courtroom. You can see what a judge does, what an attorney does, what a court reporter does, what a court officer does, what a defendant does. So the judge said, you fall asleep in my courtroom one more time, I'm putting you in the back. Understood? He didn't mean the back of the courtroom. He meant back where they hold people. At another point, he told her, one thing you learn about my courtroom is that I am not a toy. I am not to be played with. And the sad part is, for him to take that leap, that there's a teenage person in his courtroom who's nodding off because she's tired. And he thinks immediately, she's making fun of me. She's treating me like I'm a toy. No, dude, persecution complex much? So I am not to be played with, which is what he interpreted that to be. He berated her, ordered her to be jailed, handcuffed her, and demanded she take off her clothes and dress instead in the uniforms prisoners wear in Wayne County, according to the lawsuit. He conducted a fake trial with her classmates and possibly his internet followers as her jurors and his audience, according to the lawsuit. And by the way, I said in one of my earlier versions of the story, I said he turned to the rabble and asked them their opinion. As referring to all the other people in the room, like you just randomly say, hey, what do you guys think? I had somebody go, Steve, I can't believe you call your followers rebel. I wasn't talking about the followers on here, or the viewers on here. I was talking about the people in the courtroom. And I didn't know if the courtroom had been open to the public other than just this class or not. Because I'll tell you right now, if you look at the people who just wander into a courtroom on any given day, you might not want them being your jury. That's just, it might just be me. Then making a mockery of the justice guaranteed by the due process clauses of the United States Constitution, while panning the camera to focus upon his juvenile audience for the benefit of his internet fans, the defendant asked the teen's peers to serve as a fake jury of public opinion and decide whether to let her go home to her mother and grandmother or to serve time in the juvenile jail, which, believe it or not, he had just talked about as being a very, very bad place. So he's saying, hey, look, you don't ever want to go there, but do you want to send her there? You can't make this stuff up. King's docket was temporarily suspended and he must undergo training, and this is following what happened, to address the underlying issues that contributed to this incident, says the chief judge in a statement last week. Now, that judge cannot remove King from the bench because he can only be removed for severe misconduct after hearings and so on, because it's an elected position. However, they can suspend him, and the state court administrative office approved the temporary suspension, both of his docket and also the training mandate that was imposed upon him. He's got to do that too. So whoop, whoop, yo says maybe it is time for some 3-comma settlements. 3-comma settlements. Dan the Man, 1689, will the judge represent himself? I've never seen a judge or an attorney get in trouble and represent themselves. I think most of them know that that's not what you want to do. But The court's chief judge said last week that King's actions don't reflect the 36th District Court's commitment to providing access to justice without intimidation or disrespect. We regularly and actively welcome students to observe and engage with the judicial process, aiming to provide valuable educational experiences and foster familiarity with the justice system. We sincerely hope that this incident does not undermine our long-standing relationships with local schools. The teen's mother said at a press conference in Southfield, which is where Figer's offices are, they're right down the street from my office, that the fallout from these actions have been devastating. She was shocked when she heard what King said to her daughter and then couldn't believe it. And that's, a phrase that people often say, I can't believe it, or you got to be kidding me. No, this is the kind of thing where you actually go, seriously? This happened? It was unexpected of what the behavior from a grown man in a courtroom, the mom said. I was speechless. I didn't know how to handle it. I felt enraged. I felt sad. I wanted to cry for my own child. And at the same time, I wanted something to be done. That's the other thing here. I have actually, not on a lot of occasions, but on a few occasions, I've represented juveniles in juvenile court. I've done that before, okay? And I can tell you right now that the magistrates and the judges who hear cases involving children understand that they need to be treated differently than the hardened criminals who get dragged into other courts, okay? And I've seen kids in a juvenile setting act out really, really badly. And I've seen a magistrate handle it perfectly. The opposite of this, okay? 15-year-old, like I said before, nodding off or drowsy in a class or in a courtroom that's being treated as a field trip. I would look at that and go, why am I not keeping this person awake? But you don't chastise them and handcuff them. So her daughter now does not want to go outside or be involved with anyone but family, the mom said. She's asking me, why did the judge do me like this? Out of all the kids, she's embarrassed and humiliated. I can't blame her. I just want the judge to take accountability for the way he humiliated my daughter. That's the thing. And if you think about this, the hard part of being a parent, you're teaching children, your own children, the ways of the world. And you're going to do what you can to teach them about the world and get them ready to go out there. And kids ask a lot of questions. And you hope you have the answers. And once in a while, your kid can ask you a question that you go, I don't know. Why would somebody do something that outrageous? And that's the point. That if, something much less had happened, you might go, well, this causes this. What causes a judge to snap on a teenager and handcuff them for nodding off during a field trip? So the mom said she and her two daughters currently don't have a permanent home, and they're going back and forth between her mom's and her aunt's homes, which is why her daughter was sleepy in court. And I saw some references to that, and some people mentioned that. And that's part of the issue, is she does not have a permanent place to stay. And so that does kind of make it a little harder on her in every aspect of her life, including just the ability to get a good night's sleep. So the homicide hearing the students were in attendance for forced the teen to relive a traumatic event, causing her to shut down. But keep in mind that the homicide hearing was separate from this incident here. It's apparent that he developed a plan for the amusement of his followers and fan base to cast the teen unwittingly in what he later described as his own episode of Scared Straight. And I believe that's the attorney, James Harrington, speaking. Harrington said there is zero immunity for King regarding his actions in the courtroom. And so some people have already asked and said, can the judge say he's got immunity from this? He's acting as the judge. Well, there's the problem. As Mr. Harrington explains, immunity applies when a judge is acting as a judge in a court proceeding. This was extracurricular, outside of being a judge. There was no hearing going on. The teen wasn't a litigant. She wasn't a party. She wasn't a witness. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a court officer. She was on a field trip. This occurred outside of the scope of a regular court proceeding. And this is something, I'm telling you right now, I've seen jurors fall asleep. I've seen judges fall asleep. Someone reminded me of that. I forgot all about it. I told the story one time where I was trying a case in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and a judge actually said, he goes, occasionally I lean back in my chair and I close my eyes. He goes, don't worry, I'm wide awake. No. But he had enough wherewithal to tell us that. And we got to watch him nod off from time to time. And that's when I would say, if I was doing a direct examination or a cross or something, okay, I'm boring the judge now. What do I do to wake things up? This was completely outside of the scope of what a judge should be allowed to do within any realm of decency, but outside of any type of proceeding. So they're saying that they're not worried that much about the immunity defense because he wasn't acting as a judge in his capacity as judge, doing judicial things, which I think is how you make an adjective out of that, right? Nothing the girl said, even if it was disrespectful, could have warranted the judge handcuffing her, dressing her in a jail uniform, and threatening to throw her into a juvenile detention center, according to Harrington. And I agree with him on that. But the thing is, she wasn't disrespectful. She wasn't. There's no allegation that she was disrespectful. So Whoop Whoop Ya says, it is his courtroom when there is no court going on. Or the question is it? Well, it is his courtroom. But you have to understand that what he's doing in the courtroom when court is not in session, he still has the power to control what's happening. But if somebody falls asleep in the courtroom when there's no court going on, and he snaps on that, that is inappropriate. But if he had simply said, hey, stand up and walk outside, and somebody hadn't, he could say, hey, that person, get him out of here, okay? But what we're talking about here is literally somebody just falling asleep. As Otis Veda says, how dare you defy me? Justin Meyer says, hey, Steve, doesn't this become kidnapping? Because technically he did remove her by force and a false arrest. Yeah, but the common law kidnapping thing, I don't often see that pled as an allegation in a tort case where you're claiming a lawsuit, you're suing somebody. And I'm not sure if that's the best thing here. They do have the false arrest, and that would probably cover that. So we'll get back to those allegations in a second. There isn't anything she could have said that would have justified what he did in the moment. Harrington says, I don't care what she said. I don't care if she was tired and fell asleep. I don't care about that. Harrington said he does not know how much King's actions related to the group of people who regularly tune in for his court docket. And again, the judge should not be worried about the audience on YouTube. That's not the point, okay? King has been criticized by attorneys in the past for commenting on his YouTube stream during hearings. Now, see, I'll comment on this stream right here because this is what I'm doing, okay? If I was doing a job over here and there's the camera incidentally recording me, for me to turn and address the camera or play it up for the camera would detract me from my job, I would think, right? So when things like this happen to hold people accountable, we can't just say, well, because it's the judge, I'm not going to take this case, Harrington said. No, trust me. Like I said, Jim Harrington, I've known him for a long time. He was a student of mine at U of D years ago. And I was watching television. I've told the story before. About 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in a waiting room in a car dealership. And I look up on the TV, and that looks familiar. And it's Figer Law. And so it's an ad for Figer Law. And it's James Harrington. And he says, here at Figer Law, all we do is win. And he's prominent in the commercial. And I knew he worked there. I knew that. I didn't know he was that prominent that he'd be in the TV commercials. But here he is holding a press conference about this case because the law firm represents the woman who's the mother. And in case you're curious, if a child, an underage person, has a cause of action against somebody steps in Michigan, they call it your next friend, and will act on your behalf. And the court will appoint somebody to be the next friend. Although in federal court, it might be a little different, but that's how you do it in state court. And so then there's a person who's shepherding the case through, and depending on the age of the minor, the court will also see to it that they have some input also. But they want somebody who's an adult to be there because, the attorney can't be calling up a child and asking them questions about discovery and so on. So there's that. But the causes of action listed in the lawsuit, like I said, you can find this online. The complaint itself is embedded into the Detroit News article, but I saw it elsewhere. And it's a federal court lawsuit filed today. And the causes of action are malicious prosecution, unlawful arrest and prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress, false arrest, and invasion of privacy. And so I'm not going to get too heavily into all of those, but in case you're curious, intentional infliction of emotional distress is one you don't hear that often. But it's when somebody does something so outrageous that it shocks the conscience of people who hear what happened. And believe it or not, this is a great example. Funny how that works. So intentional infliction of emotional distress, that's one of them. It's often where people try to do things to scare somebody or to really tick somebody off. They do something crazy. That's intentional infliction of emotional distress. Malicious prosecution speaks for itself. Unlawful arrest, likewise. False arrest, but invasion of privacy, in case you're curious, here she's going to say, hey, look, I was simply on this field trip with a bunch of people, and I nodded off, yeah, whatever. And I woke up, and the judge chastised me and apparently fell asleep a second time. And the judge snapped on me, had me handcuffed, and did all these things that thrust her into the spotlight. And she didn't ask for that, and she didn't deserve that, I don't think. But of course, it'll be up to a jury to decide if this gets to a jury. Now, this is a very interesting idea if you think about this, because if you were an individual facing these kinds of allegations, assuming that there was a situation where these allegations would make sense against an individual, you might go, gee, I'll just settle this. I don't know how the court's going to behave, though, because I'm assuming that the courts are going to step in on some level and defend the judge, or maybe not. I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. But they've named him, that is the judge. They've also named a couple John Does and Jane Rose, possibly. I believe there's 4 people, maybe 5 other people who are either court officers, bailiffs, or sheriffs. And quite frankly, and I apologize for not knowing this, but 36th District Court for many, many years hired an independent third-party organization to run their security. So you come in to speak to a court officer or a bailiff, and it'll be a person wearing the uniform of a security company you might see at the mall. I'm not making that up. Now, a lot of circuit courts have got sheriffs at them acting as bailiffs, and they're in full uniform. And that makes complete sense too. So I'm not sure if it's a budgetary thing, because I'm guessing that the 36th District Court, being in Detroit, would probably need to have city cops. They may have decided, hey, it's better to have city cops out on the streets, and we'll hire this organization to come in and do this. And so the allegation is that when the judge tells a court officer to do something that is illegal, they shouldn't do it. You can't just say, well, I'm just following orders, that whole thing. So Lord Bretai, and I hope I'm saying it correctly, says, yay, I made a stream. I missed this story. It's on my watch list. Did the judge personally put the cuffs on? Because that'd be weird. I don't believe he did. I believe that one of the court officers or one of the bailiffs would have done that. And so that's why they're being sued. But of course, this is all being done at the direction and under the control of the judge. And somebody asked earlier, but the judge controls the courtroom. Yes, which cuts both ways. So he has the right to do what's necessary to maintain order in the court and conduct court the way court gets conducted. But he also is responsible for things that happen in there, okay? Especially when he tells people to do them. And so Ricky Green says the judge oversteps his authority on multiple occasions because this didn't just happen. No, you are absolutely correct. And what's weird about it is there's a series of actions that were taken. And first, let's assume for a moment that the stories I've heard about his side of it make sense. Let's assume that for argument's sake, okay? Arguendo. He sees a girl nodding off in class while he's lecturing. It's not a class, it's a courtroom, but it's a field trip. He says something to her about waking up or I'm going to send you to the back. She apparently nods off a second time, and he snaps on her and says, okay, get up here, go over here, has her handcuffed and changes into the jail clothes and makes some comments about, I'm not a toy, you don't toy with me, okay? Think about all the occasions he had to reflect and go, maybe I should cool it just a little bit here. Maybe. And by the way, we've all seen that, right? We've all seen that before, where somebody is being pushed to the brink and they're ready to snap. And then they stop and they don't snap. And by the way, we've all wanted to snap. Hey, I drive in traffic, okay? We've all wanted to snap. But there's that thing inside of us, that governor, the switch, the gate that comes down and goes, no, you shouldn't do that. That's not how you behave. Don't do that. Okay. And this, unfortunately, is a little bit of a problem because some judges do let the power go to their heads. And I remember years ago, I had a judge in Oakland County Circuit Court. Judge is no longer with us, but the judge did something with an order I had and said, you can go take this down to the clerk and get copies made. And I brought it down to the clerk and she goes, no, this is done wrong. You got to take it back up. So I take it back up to the judge's clerk. And the judge's clerk goes, no, that's how this judge does it. So I take it back down to the court clerk and I said, they're not going to do anything. That's what the judge does. And she goes, I forgot. In his courtroom, he's God. Even the court clerk knew that what the guy's doing is wrong. So Gilbert claims she doesn't have one of those, referring to the gate or the safety mechanism, the governor that keeps her from snapping. I bet you do. It just depends on whether it's appropriate or not, right? I mean, I'll admit I've had occasions where I've snapped publicly, but if I told you the circumstances that led to it, you go, oh, okay, I see that. But also, I'm not a judge. I'm not doing it in my courtroom. There's a huge difference. Casper says a 15-year-old student is likely traumatized. Well, that's the thing, and that's what the mom is saying. And by the way, in case you're curious, some people will ask these questions. They go, Steve, if I go into court and say I'm traumatized, do I get money? Do they shovel money at me because I say I'm traumatized? No. What'll happen is if this case was to go to trial, full-blown jury trial, let's say that this case goes to trial and both sides are prepared, they will actually have somebody examine her psychologically to see what this did to her. And the other side will also. So it doesn't matter which side did it first, but both sides will bring in experts who are going to say, this is what happened to her and whether or not that's reasonable based on, my 25 years of experience handling children with trauma, And so a jury then gets to pick a winner between the various competing experts. But it's not like you just go into court, tell your story, and they write you a check. No. You got to put in proofs on all of this stuff. The interesting part is if this appeared on YouTube, presumably that means the entire thing was filmed. Now, the courts also have recording equipment in place for the purposes of the court reporter. So that likewise will create a very good record of it. So there's not going to be much debate about what he said or what she did or what he did or what those other people did at his direction. That's all going to be, no, let's just go to the tape. And I taught trial practice for 10 years. I taught law students how to try cases, okay? And I can tell you, and this is not just me speaking, this is also the author of the book, Trial Techniques, which is the Bible of trial practice, written by a guy named Thomas Mowat. It looks like Mowat, and everybody says Mowat, but I think the T is silent. And he'll tell you, and I'll tell you, that if you put a witness on the stand and they take 10 minutes to explain something that happened, 8 minutes in, there's jurors nodding off. But if you say, I've got a story to tell you that takes 10 minutes from when it started to when it ended, and we got the entire thing on videotape, the jury's going to be like, oh, can we watch that now? Or do we have to wait? And by the way, unless there's something weird about the angle or the resolution or something, if you've got good video of what happened, good luck trying to get on the stand and testify against it. Well, that's not what happened. Who are you going to believe? Me or that lying videotape? So Blizzard Inc. said, are these cameras always on or just when the court is in session? Most of the cameras I'm familiar with are on in Michigan almost all the time. And the cameras are on because of security issues also. Now, whether they're recording or not, I know that's what you're asking. I still think they are. But a lot of times they'll say things like, well, on the record, let's put this on the record. They're doing that as just a note to the a person who's running all that, hey, we're about to get important here. But the fact of the matter is that this was on YouTube, so it doesn't even matter in many respects whether the other cameras were on, but they should have been. So Toulouse Goose says this wasn't from a school. The field trip organizer is part of a nonprofit. Yeah, I mentioned that in the story. It's called The Greening of Detroit. And so it's not in the sense that it was a school field trip, but it was a field trip for a nonprofit that was attempting to take students out, student-aged kids out, and show them different career paths, I guess. And so they go to the courthouse, 36th District Court, and they can see, like I said, lawyers, judges, court reporters, bailiffs, all that stuff. So Sylvia Rusty, Babyface Singh, says he wasn't acting the capacity of a judge here. Court wasn't even in session. It was a tour of the court. Yeah, and like I said before, I think calling it a field trip, which is accurate, which that's what they called it, is in fact what it was. It was a field trip. And I went on some field trips, like I said before, and some of you in Michigan can confirm, Henry Ford Village, Greenfield Village, Boblo Island, Detroit Tigers Stadium back when that was a thing. And if you got in trouble, you didn't wind up in handcuffs. A teacher may come by and yell at you and, threaten you with grounding, which, by the way, they never did once you got back to school, which we figured out later. So John Laurie says judge needs a field trip to jail. Proud Liberal 24 says the judge and the police officer applied the long arm of the law during handcuffing. So Jazz On says, please get a better mic for your live streams. Oh, I probably could. You understand that microphone is a $400 microphone, okay? This one is not. You can't see it, can you? I'm using a Blue Nessie. It's not a bad mic. It's got zero latency. It doesn't make you get all thrown off. Marion Norton says, I hear you fine. Okay, now this is degenerating into a behind-the-scenes thing. Reinhard Mann says, was this one of those scared straight programs? No, it wasn't, but the judge did reference it. And he actually said, well, it's kind of a scared straight situation. And he forgot that the kids were in front of him for a field trip, not because they were delinquents. I mean, that's the crazy part. Who would start with the concept that, oh, these kids need to be scared straight when they're on a field trip? What? Pyroclastic says, hey, can we cross-examine? Would somebody cross-examine her on the on her background during the trial? Yeah, and so they can cross-examine her on some of this, but the real point is she's accused of falling asleep. It's hard to cross-examine somebody on that and make any ground. Isn't it true you fell asleep twice? The jury be looking at you going, leave that poor young lady alone. Please, please. Angry Capitalist says, the perfectly fine mic. Thank you very much. Kasu EQ says, congratulations on 10,000 subs. Have I hit 10,000 subs already? I don't know. I want melons. Can the parent sue the organizers of the trip? I highly doubt that would make much sense because it's not something that they had control of. It's not like they put her in a dangerous situation. Who'd have thought that going to court would do this? So Connor Horman said, did you hear about the other judge that handcuffed a teen recently? I did, but I didn't get that deeply into it. And it's strange that two stories pop at the same time like that. If they get a settlement from the judge, can they also sue the teacher? Whoop, whoop, yo. I don't think the teacher or the other people who organized this trip, unless you can show they committed some kind of negligence by organizing this trip, I don't think anybody's going to think that. So I don't really see that either. Whoop, whoop, yes, is no teacher at a school field trip. Well, there was somebody with the organization. Bullhorn says, I'm surprised the 15-year-old didn't refuse to change her clothing. Well, I can tell you right now that when there's a judge directing a bailiff to handcuff you and get you into jail clothing, it's hard for a 15-year-old, especially a well-behaved one, to actually think, I need to object to this for fear of what could happen. Because remember, there was a hint that jail time could be involved or a trip to the juvenile court, juvenile detention. Steve Colasar, Steve, you're my hero and my namesake and my son's too. Are you perhaps a Stephen like we are, or Stephen with a V? Stephen with a V. I've got nothing against the PH Stevens. Nothing. But just so you know, I always use professionally Steve. And it's kind of funny because I'll put myself on the record, Steve Lehto, on behalf of the plaintiff, standing next to me in courtroom, blah, 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 blah. I never say Stephen. And I've had a court reporter say, psst, psst, psst. Do you spell it with a V or a PH? And I go, you can only spell Steve with a V. And they go, yeah, but is it Stephen or Stephen? I go, no, it's Steve. And usually that solves the problem, but not always, not always. So, it's CLB, CL5 says qualified immunity here. We addressed the immunity earlier. The attorney from Feiger Law says that he expects there to be zero immunity for the judge here regarding his actions because, I'm going to read the quote here because it's good. Immunity applies when a judge is acting as a judge in a court proceeding. This was extracurricular. This is outside of being a judge. There was no hearing going on. The teen wasn't a litigant. She wasn't a party. She wasn't a witness. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a court officer. She was there on a field trip. This occurred outside of the scope of a regular court proceeding. Therefore, he thinks zero immunity. How much? Zero. A little? No. Zero immunity. Zero. So there we go. So Lowell Riggs IM says, who all are exposed to liability? Here the lawsuit names the judge, and I believe it's either 4 or 5 court personnel. I don't have the lawsuit in front of me. I did print it out, so I wasn't sure if I had enough blue paper to do that, but I didn't think it was that necessary. So anywho, the point is that this is an update to a story I did. And I was expecting to do a follow-up on it somewhere down the road, but this update will replace the last update, kind of like the opening captions of Monty Python's Holy Grail. Kept getting replaced and replaced and replaced. My sister was once bitten by a moose, but that's another story altogether. So I'm going to wrap it up now. We've been talking for more than 30 minutes, and that's long for me. And I know a lot of you have places to go and people to see and that kind of thing. So I will talk to you soon. As always, I put the videos up on the channel, Lehto's Law, and occasionally we do updates or afternoon videos. Depends on how things are working out. But I hope you have a great evening. I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.